Welcome to another episode of Erik Wait Whiskey Studies, and in this video, I want to provide 10 more highly recommended cask strength whiskeys. So I did a previous video in which I recommended top 10 cask strength whiskeys. In that video, I had some whiskeys that aren't labeled cask strength, had some interesting interaction with a comment to the video, and we were talking about the legal definition of cask strength. So before I get in my 10 list of cask strength whiskeys, let me talk a little bit about the legal definition of a cask strength whiskey. The Scotch Whisky Regulations of 2009 do not define cask strength. The UK's Department of Environmental, Food and Rural Affairs noted in a 2013 technical file the alcoholic strength of cask strength Scotch whisky must not be adjusted after maturation. The Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau, TBB, which regulates whiskey labels in the United States, does not currently have a formal definition of cask strength or barrel proof, but it has issued a ruling. In order to use these terms on the label, the spirit's proof can't be more than 2 proof degrees lower than it was when gauged for tax purposes. So if a whiskey exits the barrel at 111 proof, that is 55.5% alcohol by volume, it can be no less than 109 proof or 54.5% alcohol by volume when it is bottled. So we see a few minor differences there. The 2 primary whiskeys I think that I had in my last video that it was questionable, are these really cask strength, was the Ardbeg Uigeadail and the Ardbeg Corryvreckan, because it doesn't actually state cask strength on the bottle. However, I think generally, in layman's terms, that term tends to get used of really high ABV whiskeys, north of 50, maybe 55 plus. We tend to use that terminology even if it isn't technically cask strength. Because if it didn't come from a single cask, then it's not really cask strength. And then there's other terminology that's very, very similar to cask strength, barrel proof, and other terminology that don't have any actual legal definition. So what we're trying to get across is whiskeys that are higher ABV, north of 50, mostly going to be north of 55. Now, in my last video, I provided 10 whiskeys that are reasonably priced, try to keep them under $100, readily available, so it doesn't do any good to recommend whiskeys that I brought back from Islay, there's say official editions or distillery only editions that you can't actually get. So same thing here, these are going to be whiskeys that generally, if you were to Google them, you can find them even if they're not necessarily at your local store. Of these 10, 2 are going to be more than $150. The rest of them, I'm trying to develop a list, provide a list that's $100 or less. $100 or less, but there are 2 that are going to be a lot more expensive. But in comparison to some other bottles that are out there, they're not north of $250. They're not that high. So my first that I'm going to recommend, coming at number 10, is the Glenlivet Nadurra Peated Cask Finish Single Malt Scotch Whisky. So if I was going to recommend any bottle from Glenlivet, it's probably going to be in the Nadurra because they're higher ABV. The rest of their whiskeys are going to be like 40, 43, while they're very nice, 12-year-old and so forth. I think the cask strength ones I'm going to recommend. And of the Nadurra line, the one I like the most is the one that has some smoky character to it. When you think peated whiskey, you don't think of Glenlivet. So before I get into this, let me tell you a little about this whiskey. The Glenlivet Nadurra Peated Speyside Single Malt Scotch Whisky. Nadurra is Gaelic for natural. It was aged in ex-bourbon casks and then finished in casks that previously contained peated Scotch whisky. It is non-chill filtered, has natural color, is bottled at 61.5% alcohol by volume, and sells for anywhere between $75 and $99. So, really, really pale in character, sort of a light straw, golden character. get an immediate waft of smoke. Now I have the sherry cask Nadurra over here. Both of these seem fairly young, so I don't think there's like a ton of cask interaction, although I do get some bourbon notes, bourbon cask notes on the Glenlivet. I think the sherry cask Nadurra needs more time, needs more interaction with the sherry cask. I would like to see more sherry cask notes in the sherry cask Nadurra. That being said, I do like this peated one. Even though it's on the younger side, it has some real nice interwoven smoke character that probably hides the youth of the whiskey. I don't get any new making character. I don't get powdered sugar or saccharine notes. Lemon, pineapple, sort of a powdered sugar note. A little bit of spice, some vanilla. A hint of bananica. A bananica? Have you ever had a bananica? A hint of banana. I don't know where I get the bananica from. I just make up words as I get older. It's called an Ericism, yeah, bananica. So when you're playing the harmonica and you're eating a banana, you get bananica. Or if you had a harmonica made from a banana, no, I haven't been drinking yet. If you had a harmonica made from a banana, it would be a bananica. I'm sorry, let's move on. On the palate. One more. Obviously, this high ABV is going to have a little tingle going on there, but there's also a sharpness of youth. It doesn't have the maturation to sort of curve and smooth off the edges of it. There's a lot of high ABV whiskeys out there that don't have this kind of bite. Now, it's not offensive. It reminds me of like a high acid Sauvignon Blanc or high acid Riesling. It has that sort of feel on the palate. Slightly creamy, a moderate development. The smoke is really interwoven really well with the fruit character. So low to moderate smoky character, slightly ashy. I like peated whiskeys that have more of a barbecue character. This doesn't have that. This gets more of sort of a waft of smoke and some ash, but interwoven with pineapple, lemon, maybe a little bit of grapefruit, some vanilla, and a hint of spice on the back end. Well, it's approachable even at this high ABV. I'm not wincing from it. There are some really young whiskeys, some that I brought back from my last trip to Scotland, and real high ABV, that because they're cask strength, they just make you sort of shiver. It's a hard bite. This isn't like this. This does fine on water. It'll fine on a rock, but it doesn't need water in order to get more flavors and aromas to come out of it. I like it as it is. What would I give it as a score? You know, I'll go solid like 86, 87 points, somewhere in that neighborhood. What would I like? Obviously more maturation, more depth, particularly in the mid palate, more depth and more extraction from the cask. But as it is, I really like it. For this price point, would I rather have this or an Ardbeg 10? Yeah, I'm going to go with an Ardbeg 10. Ardbeg 10 is a little difficult to beat. Or a Lechic 10 for the price range. Just getting more age on it, you just get more development, more of a cask character from it. But nevertheless, if you haven't tried it, I highly recommend it. And coming in at number 9 is the Macallan Highland Single Malt Scotch Whisky Classic Cut. So I visited Macallan Distillery in 2018, about 2 weeks after the new distillery opened, and I really liked the tour. Macallan was what introduced me to Scotch whiskey. It was my first love. It was the Macallan 12-year-old. So I really like Macallan. I think a lot of people, they're put off by the marketing shtick. They think in terms of quality price ratio, there are a lot of other bottles on the market that go for a lot less. In fact, I'll have a few other sherry cask strength whiskeys in this lineup that I would probably pay the money for that are under $100 before I would buy these. Nevertheless, Macallan has a distinctive character that I really like. And so if you're going to buy something from Macallan, I would recommend the Classic Cut. But before I get into these, let me tell you a little bit about them. The Macallan Classic Cut Highland Single Malt Scotch Whisky was aged in ex-bourbon American oak and sherry seasoned European oak casks. It is non-chill filtered, has natural color, and the alcohol by volume and prices can vary depending on the vintage. The 2024 edition was bottled at 52.4% alcohol by volume. You can find it for around $135. The 2023 edition has been bottled at 50.3% alcohol by volume and sells around for $150. And the 22 edition has been bottled at 52.5% alcohol by volume and sells for anywhere between $180 and $250. So I have here the 2022 and the 2020. The 2024 is just now hitting the market in my neighborhood, and the prices are a little high, more than I want to spend on a whiskey. But I gotta say, I think I will always have a Classic Cut on my shelf because I like that much. So that means when these are gone, and let's say it's 2025, when I get around to buying another one, I'll buy one because I like it that much. It's something I always want to have on my shelf. And if I want to share something from Macallan Distillery with a friend or something like that, that's what I'm going to reach for. These two are not that different in terms of quality and in terms of the differences in the aromas and the flavors. Generally speaking, I would say they have a sort of nice balance between the sherry cask and the bourbon cask influence. A lot of citrus, lemon, orange peel. The maltiness is there, vanilla. There's Christmas cake. Just a hint of raisins and sultanas. And just a hint of spice. On the palate, it's sweet all the way through. Get a lot more spice on the palate than I did on the nose. Mostly citrus, so lemon and dried oranges, and even but a really concentrated orange, like an orange peel. There's that hint of raisins, sultanas, which has come from the sherry cask. Maybe it's just a hint of fig compote, and then some vanilla coming from the bourbon cask. It's got a fairly decent variation from the front and the middle into the finish, and a nice long finish. And I like the sort of silky mouthfeel. So at this ABV, it's still very approachable. I don't need to add any water or anything like that. So if you're gonna reach for a Macallan and you can get a Classic Cut, that is the one that I'm gonna recommend. I would spend a lot, I would be willing to buy one of these a lot more than I would say like an 18-year-old 8-segment one that's gonna be a lower ABV and cost a whole lot more. Coming in at number 8 is the Tomatin Highland Single Malt Scotch Whisky Cask Strength. So as you can see by the fill level on this one, I really like this whiskey. In fact, I'm a big fan of Tomatin Distillery in general. Visited the distillery in 2019. They are actually one of the larger capacity distilleries, although they're not running at full capacity. And a lot of their production actually goes into blends. So, and they're Japanese owned, so some of their spare is going over into Japan. That being said, I really like Tomatin. They have a unique mouthfeel, and they do some real unique bottles. This is the Tomatin Manzanilla cask. This is the Tomatin Fino sherry cask. Both Manzanilla and Fino are a type of sherry from the Jerez region. Manzanilla is closer to the ocean, but it's other than that, it's the same grape as Fino, made in the same production, but because it's closer to the ocean, it's a little bit different in the climate, and so the wines themselves are a little bit different. But by the time, you put it into the cask and so forth, there's not a huge difference between the Fino and the Manzanilla. They also do an Oloroso, and they do a peated whiskey called Kuboken, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I used to have a bottle. I don't anymore. I finished it and haven't picked up another one. So before I get into this one, let me tell you a little bit about the cask strength. The Tomatin Cask Strength Highland Single Malt Scotch Whisky, aged in ex-bourbon, American oak, and sherry casks. It is non-chill filtered, has natural color, is bottled at 57.5% alcohol by volume, and sells for around $60. So I'd say it's a real even hand between the sherry cask and the bourbon cask. Neither one is dominating. However, if you look at the color, looks kind of golden there, so dipping a little bit more on the sherry cask. Just a slightest tinge of red. You might not be able to pick that up on the camera. On the nose, get some of that sherry oxidized note, that dried fig notes, dried raisins. Just a hint of that sulfur note. But then the bourbon cask counterbalances. Vanilla, citrus, orange, and yellow. Orange, also orange or orange peel coming from the sherry cask. A hint of spice. And some nice floral notes. I don't get floral notes that often on whiskeys, but I'm picking some up on this one. On the palate. Wow. 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 One more. Sweet up front. Sort of dries and gets a little bit nutty on the back end. That's from the sherry casks. It's creamy and spicy on the finish. So that's a really nice evolution. Up front, there's like toffee. There's vanilla kicking in the mid palate. There's an almond nuttiness to this one. Toffee, almost like a candy bar, like a Snickers candy bar. Raisins, lemon, orange. On the back end, it dries and the spice really kicks in a lot more. It's a lot more spicy on the back end than it is on the nose. I love the mouthfeel on these. This sort of mouth-coating, round, creamy feel to it. This is an absolutely killer whiskey. Score-wise, I'm going to give it like a solid 89 points. And the price point on this is absolutely fantastic. If you can find it, I still see this for less than $70. I think that I paid like 60 or 65 in my neighborhood. Alrighty, let's move on to our next whiskey. Coming in at number 7 is the Aberlour Highland Single Malt Scotch Whisky A'bunadh, matured in Spanish Oloroso sherry butts. So I visited Aberlour in 2019. One of the unique things about Aberlour is they will completely mature a whiskey in Oloroso sherry cask, then a complete maturation of another spirit in 100% bourbon cask, and then they take the two and blend them together in different percentages to come up with the blend they want when they have a bourbon cask and Oloroso sherry cask blend. However, both of these are called A'bunadh. This is 100% bourbon cask. This is 100% Oloroso sherry cask. This is called the A'bunadh Alba. I've not opened this one yet. This is one of my round to it whiskeys where I buy a bottle, stick it on a shelf, and then, one of these days I'll get around to it. Sometime within the next year, I'll probably get around to reviewing this one. However, I have tried it at the distillery. If you do a tour of the distillery, you can actually taste a bunch of their whiskeys and then make your own blend using 100% bourbon cask and 100% Oloroso sherry cask. And you can buy these at the distillery as well as off the shelf in terms of the A'bunadh bottlings. They have distillery-only edition bottles of 100% Oloroso and 100% bourbon cask. So, before I tell you about this one, let's get into the notes. The Aberlour A'bunadh Batch Strength Speyside Single Malt Scotch Whisky. A'bunadh means the original. It was matured in Oloroso sherry butts. Batch strength can vary. I have batch number 64, which was bottled at 59.9% alcohol by volume. It is non-chill filtered, has natural color, and sells for around $96 for the most current release. So because these are batch releases, they're not from a single cask, they're batch releases, There can be some variation in the ABV. This is batch number 64, bottled at 59.9% alcohol by volume. So even though there's going to be some batch differences, it's not like some radical difference like this one's going to be somehow radically better than that one. I have tried other batches, and yes, there are differences, but it's completely subjective whether one is better than the other. This really comes on with the sherry cask. Dried figs, dates, raisins, dried orange peel, lemon, a very intense and acute spiciness, vanilla. Wow. It reminds me of a barbecue rub. I'm more of a barbecue rub kind of person. I love barbecue tri-tip. I make a rub using brown sugar, kosher salt, and a number of different herbs and spices, and that's what I get on the nose on this one. So if you like that character, this is the one you're going to go for. Wow. It's pretty intense and sharp on the nose in terms of how far you're going to get your nose in there, because that spice is really kicking in as well as the alcohol. Let's try it on the palate. Sweet on entry, and then that spice just kicks in right in the mid palate. Goes from sweet to savory with a slight herbal, herbaceous character of a dry rub that you'd put on a meat. Dried oranges, dried lemons, dried figs, dates, raisins. It has a little grip to it. It does seem like it has a little bit of tannin going on there, and it has a really long finish. It has a nice round mouth coating feel. Now, some people are going to prefer the Tomatin cask strength, which I just previously reviewed, over this one. I like the mouthfeel on the Tomatin, but in terms of the intensity of the flavors and the depth of the flavors, I'm going to say the A'bunadh has a lot more kapow to it. But I like there's a sort of round, creamy texture to Tomatin that is just a very distinctive characteristic of all of their whiskeys. So absolutely fantastic. Well, I'm going to give this one in terms of a score. I'm going to go solid like 88, 89 points right around there. Alrighty, so let's move on to our next whiskey. And number 6 is Maker's Mark Private Select Kentucky Bourbon Whiskey, which is barrel finished with oak staves. So Maker's Mark actually has 2 different cask strength whiskeys, and a little careful there on the cork. So, note on the cork, this is a nice solid cork, but it's artificial, which I'm actually kind of happy about because it didn't break. Bought this in 2016 at the distillery. In fact, I dipped this into the wax myself. Something cool you can do if you visit the distillery. All their bottles are hand dipped into wax, and the labels are put on by hand as well, handwritten in terms of the date on there. So if you visit the distillery, you can do your own dipping. You have to wear special gloves and that kind of thing, do the whole touristy thing. They don't want you to burn yourself and end up suing them. They have another cask strength, which is their regular bottling, just done at cask strength. So it's the same as this one, just at cask strength. This is a round to it bottle I bought, put it on my shelf, said one of these days I got to get around to reviewing it. So 2025, I'll probably be doing a lot more round to it bottles. I've been so focused on Scotch whiskey over the last few years, but I've collected other bottles that were not part of my study, both Scotch whiskeys as well as bourbons. And it's like, one of these days I'll get around to it. So, before I get into this, here are my notes. Maker's Mark Private Select Kentucky Straight Bourbon. The Private Select differs from the Maker's Mark 46 in using 5 different stave options with a potential of 1,001 different combinations. They are non-chill filtered, has natural color. The ABV ranges from 108 to 114 proof. Mine is bottled at 110.9 proof or 55.45% alcohol by volume, and you can pick one up for about $73. So most of my channel has been focused on Scotch whiskey over the last few years. However, I do on occasion, even if I'm not reviewing it, I like to have a bourbon, particularly in the summertime. There's a cask strength bourbon. I like to put it on ice. If you put it on ice, you get more of the cask notes. I get a little more of the vanilla and cinnamon. The fruit notes sort of back up, but you get more vanilla. So it's kind of like drinking melted vanilla ice cream, which I kind of like. So a lot of the baking spices, cinnamon and nutmeg, a lot of vanilla, caramel corn. There's a hint of like a maraschino cherry or cherry cough drops. Wow. So I'm really happy so far because I did buy this a while ago and I hadn't been into it. Generally speaking, I haven't had any problems with any whiskeys getting old and over aerating. I've only had one whiskey that was over aerated, and that was a previous version of the original Maker's Mark. And there was one whiskey, it was actually off the shelf at a whiskey bar in Scotland, that it was like the dregs, you know, the bottom of the bottle, and it was an old bottle of scotch, and it was way over oxidized. It had that kind of stale character. So thus far, this is a bottle that's opened quite some time ago, and it's doing just fine. But let's try it on the palate. Really rich. Banana bread, banana pudding, those sort of characteristics. That cherry note is right there, like a cherry cough drop. Caramel, toffee, butterscotch. It is really rich, has a nice coating mouthfeel. It's silky and creamy. A lot of the baking spices on the back end, some cinnamon, and a little bit of nutmeg. Really like this one. When it comes to bourbons, I tend to go for those that have at least a little bit of a rye note. I'm more of an Elijah Craig barrel proof fan, but this is really good. I really like this whiskey and enjoyed touring the distillery. It goes dry and slightly tannic right about 3/4 of the way back, but it's not offensive. It's actually a nice sort of counterbalanced texture than just being smooth the whole time. So it does give you a little bit of grip to counterbalance the smoothness of the whiskey. So this is a killer bourbon, particularly if you're not into that sort of the licorice herbal notes of a bourbon with rye in it. What would I give in terms of score? I'm gonna go solid like 87, 88 points. It does have a real nice long finish. I do like the transitions. I do like the mouthfeel. But I would like something a little bit more in the mid palate than what it delivers. But in order to get that, you would probably need to change the mash bill. You need to put in a little bit of rye in there. But other than that, it's an absolutely superb whiskey. And I am looking forward to, hopefully in this next year, to get into this cask strength. Interesting note, this is at 55.45. This one is at 55.4. So in terms of cask strength, in terms of ABV or proof level, they are right about the same. All right, on to our next whiskey, whiskey number 5. And number 5 is the Glen Elgin 18-year-old limited edition single malt Scotch whiskey. So I was a little hesitant to put this one on the list because this is one of 5,332 bottles. So a little under 6,000, a little over 5,000, a little bit more challenging to get. And this is the most expensive bottle on the list. But if you Google it, you can find this bottle. It's not impossible to get a hold of. And there have been other releases of the 18-year-old, but they would be at a different ABV than this one. So I really like this whiskey. It's insanely expensive. Not overly complex in terms of what they did with it. Pretty simple, straightforward. They put in a bourbon cask, age it for 18 years, and then wham bam, there you go, you got the whiskey. And yet it is so elegant, so layered, and has so much finesse. But before getting into this, here are my notes. The Glen Elgin 18-year-old cask strength Highland single malt Scotch whiskey matured in ex-bodega European oak butts. It's non-chill filtered, has natural color, bottled at 54.8% alcohol by volume. I paid $246. I've seen this selling for over $500. And some sources state that it was actually matured in ex-sherry butts and refill European oak. So this is a whiskey, you have to kind of like quiet your mind and just pay attention to the subtle layers. This, even though it's cask strength, this is not a big in your face with all kinds of various aromas and flavors going on. There are these little subtle sort of dainty notes going on here. Layers of vanilla, lemon custard, cinnamon. There's like the glaze on a donut. I try to think of it. You ever have someone bring a box of donuts to work, you know, and you haven't eaten them yet, but just as soon as you open that box of donuts, you get this waft of the sugar glaze off of the donuts. You get that kind of a thing. I had this happen at work. People bring in donuts, and I'm trying not to eat. And at the time of recording this is just for the holidays. People bring in all kinds of goodies, and the people bring in donuts, and I'm like, no, I can't be eating this stuff. I need to lose a few pounds, so I'm not eating this stuff. But just the smell of donuts is just amazing, and I kind of get that. Particularly with like the lemon, the vanilla, hints of cinnamon. You can smell a slight sort of a musty, malty character there. Hints of dried pineapple with like a confectionery powdered sugar on it. Wow. And this is like these light, delicate aromas. Even though it's cask strength, I can stick my nose up in it and I don't get like a whole lot of tingle on the palate. Again, usually I describe whiskeys as front, middle, and the finish. Don't know why. This one seems to come more from top, middle, and bottom. I don't know why. It's just the way it is. It starts off quiet, gets louder, and then it fades again towards the finish. Lemon custard, little lemon squares with powdered sugar on it, dried pineapple, maybe a little bit of banana, hints of cinnamon. This reminds me of a very high-end, like Grand Cru, Premier Cru Chardonnay from Burgundy. You know, these like $200 bottles of Chardonnay. That's what it reminds me of. Something where it just like, wow, that is really, really something. It is so light and so delicate with so much finesse. It's like, and there's no burn. There's no bite whatsoever. I mean, it's just so easy and so approachable. In that case, a little dangerous. And it's like a violin. Someone playing a fine violin, you know, just excellent violinist, versus say a big, you know, peaty Islay single malt Scotch whiskey that just is like a heavy metal guitar. This is the other end. This is a classical music in a glass. That's absolutely fantastic. If I was going to identify it with classical music, I'm going to say Vivaldi. Vivaldi's The Four Seasons. That's what this whiskey is. Absolutely superb, and which is why everybody's getting mad because it's hard to get a hold of and it's very expensive. Score-wise, I'm going to go like 92, 93 points. It's the structure, mouthfeel, and the overall experience that just makes this whiskey absolutely fantastic. Coming in at number 4 is the Isle of Raasay Hebridean Single Malt Scotch Whisky Cask Strength Release. This is a limited edition from 2024. So this is a bottle I picked up from the distillery when I visited in April 2024. Spent a couple days there on the island with the Council of Whiskey Masters. However, I have seen this one here in California. I've seen this one in my local neighborhood, but maybe not this exact release. So you may be able to find near you another cask strength from Raasay, but not necessarily this 2024 release. So the casking could be different. Before you buy it or compare it with this video with what you see on the shelf, you know, just take out your smartphone and look it up. So Raasay is a brilliant distillery. Not only a beautiful location, but a brilliant distillery. One of the challenges of being a younger distillery is to have something ready for market, even though you're not 10 years old or you haven't had spirit and cask for 10 years plus. So how do you counterbalance or counteract the younger notes? So I'll tell you more about that after I tell you a little bit more about this whiskey. Aberlour Raasay cask strength single malt Scotch whiskey. It is lightly peated, it is non-chill filtered, has natural color. It was matured in ex-rye cask, ex-chinkapin cask, ex-red wine cask, and is bottled at 61.3% alcohol by volume. So there's several different things you can do as a young distillery to sort of counterbalance or either mask a young spirit. A young spirit will give you these sort of saccharine notes, fake sugar notes, maybe some I find slightly off-putting green notes. This doesn't have any of that. So rather than try to mask the character of a young spirit, they're providing counterbalances. So I don't get any saccharine, I don't get any fake sugar, I don't get any aspartame notes. And I don't necessarily get any of those sort of limey green notes. But what I do get is just a slight waft of smoke. And then as you saw there in the notes, they're using different casks to provide additional flavors. And what is brilliant is they're using not only chinkapin, which I think adds a spicy character, but they're using rye cask. Chinkapin is a sort of a subcategory under Quercus alba from here in the United States. By the way, there are a whole lot of other Quercuses. It sounds like some sort of animal you find swimming around in the ocean. Oh, there's a porpoise, a dolphin, and a Quercus. Oh, I think someone lives at Marine World. Or at the zoo or something. Anyway, sorry. I have not been drinking. I'm just feeling goofy. So, there are a lot of other Quercuses, but here in the United States, or subcategories, you just like Quercus montana, or which is also known as a chestnut oak, but you don't hear about them because nobody's making cask with them to make whiskey. At least not that I know of. So they're using this chinkapin, which adds a spice note. They're using a rye cask, which is absolutely brilliant, to add a spice note without actually adding rye, a rye grain, just a slight pepperiness coming in from the rye cask. Then a slight fruitiness coming from the red wine cask. Intermingled with that is just a light waft of smoke on the palate. There is a sharpness because it doesn't have a long maturation. Maturation, even on a cask strength whiskey, can sort of help soften the edges. Peat smoke also seems to help counterbalance sharp edges. So this maintains a sharp edge of not only of a high ABV whiskey, but of a younger spirit. But it's like a crispness. It's like comes across as like a high acid wine, an acidity, which is actually a different character to it as to whether or not you like it. Not everything has to be smooth or silky or easy to wash down. So along with that sharpness is also the peppery kick. It's got a peppery kick, particularly in the mid palate. So up front, it's got nice sweetness. You can tell the wine cask providing some fruitiness there. And then the mid palate, spice starts to kick in with a little bit of sharpness. And underneath all that is just a waft of smoke that sort of provides a frame around the aromas and the flavors of the whiskey. I think this is absolutely brilliant in what they're doing. I'm looking forward to see what they do over the next 5 to 10 years and how whiskeys with age statements 12, 15 or older will do. I would highly recommend anyone who has a newer distillery in Scotland not to imitate Raasay per se, but visit Raasay Distillery, see what they're doing, taste the spirits, taste their whiskeys, and go and be inspired by it. To avoid some of the trip falls of being a new distillery, because I think Raasay has really got it going on. This is the definition of craft Scotch single malt whiskey. Absolutely brilliant. Score-wise, I got to give it at least like a 90 points. At least a 90 points if I wasn't going to go higher. I think it's absolutely superb. I think it's absolutely brilliant. And I really enjoyed my visit. It's quite a trek to get to the distillery. Not only in terms of hitting a lot of single track roads and up and over the hill and the dale and passing by the cows and the sheep and the goats and everything else that's out there out on the countryside. Absolutely beautiful. And then you got to take a ferry ride to get out to the island. But it is well worth the trip if you can make it out there. So, score-wise, 90 points. If you can get your hands on a bottle, I highly recommend them. I picked up some little samplers while I was there, and looking forward to trying these. I'm not going to review these. These are too small. But if I'm ever traveling or something like that, want to bring something with me. Unfortunately, you can't drink them on the plane. But something you can put in my luggage and take with me. Alrighty, let's move on to whiskey number 3. And whiskey number 3 is the Lagavulin Islay Single Malt Scotch Whisky 12-year-old natural cask strength whiskey. So I have the 2016 200th anniversary edition. They were founded in 1816. I like this one so much that I bought a second bottle, which has not been opened yet because this one is only down here. Now, I have a bunch of other cask strength whiskeys from Lagavulin, but I picked them up at the distillery, including Fish Ale editions, Jazz Festival editions, and so forth, and some just distillery special releases. So if you go to the distillery, you can bring back a whole bunch of bottles. If you go in May, you could go to the Fish Ale. I've never been to the Fish Ale Festival of the Island. To me, it'd probably be overcrowded. But if you go within a month, say in June or maybe into July, you can still pick up the Fish Ale editions because they make enough to go beyond just the festival. Whew. So before I get into this, let me tell you a little bit more about it. The Lagavulin 12-year-old Islay Single Malt Scotch Whisky. These are matured in ex-bourbon casks, so non-chill filtered, have natural color. The 2023 release is bottled at 56.4% alcohol by volume. Prices range from $155 to $175. I have 2 bottles of the 2016, which are bottled at 57.7% alcohol by volume. So when I was reviewing various Lagavulin bottles, I had someone say in a comment, someone who's, I would say, fairly knowledgeable about whiskey, comment in the section that Lagavulins don't have a long shelf life once you open them. So that's one of the things I want to look at because, one, it's about more than 2/3 empty, and secondly, this one's been open probably since, I don't know, 2018, somewhere around there when I first picked this up. It seems smokier and peatier than your typical Lagavulin, a little bit more on the ashy side. On the fruit, you get like quince. I remember it's like a quince is like a pear, but they're real hard. So you actually want to cook them. And every time I've had quince, they've had a glaze, or a baked quince with a glaze on it, and I kind of get that. But imagine if you take baked quince, but you did it on a barbecue, so you end up being peated. I do get a little bit of lemon and lime in terms of fruit. There's a slight nuttiness, a light chocolate, and the smoke and the peat is really interwoven really, really well. I would say, in terms of comparison to other Lagavulins, this is smokier, peatier, and ashier than other Lagavulins. And of course, at this high ABV, it's got a lot more kapow going on. On the palate, sweet, creamy. The age, the maturation has curved the edges. It doesn't have any sharpness to it. And then along with the smoke and the peat, that also sort of calms the bite. It does have a little bit of a tingle because of the ABV. But this is great, neat. I don't feel like I need to add any water to it. It is rich. It's like a melted Snickers bar that's been peated, that's been put on a barbecue. You got the chocolate, you got the nuts, you got the nougat. It's got a little saltiness going on in there. It doesn't necessarily have a huge change from front and the middle into the finish, but it's got a nice, hefty, long finish. The Lagavulin 16-year-old, which comes in at 43% alcohol by volume, it has more layered character. It has more nuanced character. but it's Aberlour ABV, and it's more than likely chill filtered. This is deeper, richer. It isn't as complex necessarily as a 16-year-old, but it's got more depth, it's got more richness, and it's got more of that sort of kapow peat lovers character to it. So even though I think the 16-year-old has more layers to it, and in that sense, just from maturation, it's a better finessed whiskey. This has a lot more of, you're really in the mood for a big waft of chocolate and peat and smoke and richness, and just deep richness. So if I was going to buy just one core range Lagavulin, this would probably be it. What I'm going to give it in terms of a score, I'm probably going to go like 89, 90 points. I think this is absolutely superb. All right, let's move on to number 2. Coming in at number 2 is the Blue Spot Single Pot Still Irish Whiskey, aged 7 years, cask strength. So this one's a little challenging to find now, and it is really, really, really expensive. But it was my number 2 whiskey a year or two ago. Absolutely superb whiskey, and I was surprised at how good it is given the age statement on it. I wish they made more like this. I like all the spots, the yellow spot, green spots. There is the green spot Chateau Magdalena. There is the green spot Chateau Barton. The Chateau Barton is done in a Bordeaux cask. Chateau Magdalena is done in a Zinfandel cask. There's the red spot. So there's a whole bunch of different colored spots. But this is the best, but the most expensive and hardest to find. Before I get into the aromas and flavors on this one, let me tell you a little bit about the profile of this whiskey. Blue Spot 7-year-old cask strength pot still Irish whiskey. It's made from malted and unmalted barley. It was triple distilled. It is non-chill filtered, has natural color. It's matured in ex-bourbon and ex-Oloroso sherry and ex-Madeira cask. And they go for over $250. So even though this is a pot still and not a single malt, there's something about it that reminds me of Raasay, and mainly in terms of the way in which they're layering in aromas and flavors using different casks. This one, I get a lot of dried tropical fruit, dried pineapple, dried mango. There's some nice vanilla going on there. Spice. And if you notice, I'm not putting my nose super deep into it, because you do get a little bit of that tingle character on the nose, being at this ABV. There is, I wasn't getting this before, there's a slight, it's like a wet stone, or just after the smell of a sidewalk, just after it rains. There's a word for that. I'll look it up and put it down here. Something core. I'll put it right here. There's some floral notes, both fresh flowers and slightly dried flowers. Wow. Orange, lemon. The orange is like a tang orange powder before you put the water into it. There's a chalkiness there. That's kind of that stone character on the palate. It's sweet and tangy. The tangy is coming from like those orange characteristics. So it's like a dried orange. There's dried tropical fruit, dried pineapple, dried guava, dried mango, vanilla. There's some saltiness kind of going on in the background. And on the retronasal, I'm getting those floral notes. This is a really complex whiskey. There is a lot going on there, and actually my descriptions are not doing it justice. There's a lot going on there from the front and the middle and into the finish. And it has a nice long finish. I'm still tasting it now. You can put a couple drops of water into it, but I don't think you're necessarily getting anything more dramatic out of it. This is a very dramatic whiskey. It's one in which you have to kind of like, man, you got all kinds of things coming at you. Aromas and flavors just coming at you. It is silky. It isn't quite mouth-coating, but it is really like intensified and sort of grabbing your palate on the mid palate. I'm still tasting it now, and I've been talking. Absolutely superb. This one definitely north of 90 points. You know, anywhere, I would say 92 to 95 points. This is absolutely superb. If you can get a bottle of this and you can get one south of 200 bucks, which I think is probably unlikely, I would say absolutely grab a bottle. All right, let's go on to whiskey, cask strength whiskey, number 1. Coming in at number 1 is the Bunnahabhain Islay Single Malt Scotch Whisky 12-year-old cask strength. So this was a bottle that a lot of people commented on my last top 10 cask strength whiskey videos. People were saying, hey, the Bunnahabhain 12-year-old cask strength. The reason why this was not in my last video was because that video was focused on bottles that were under 100 bucks and widely available. And at the time, I didn't think the Bunnahabhain 12-year-old cask strength was all that widely available, therefore I didn't have it on the list. However, I have seen it more and more often in my neighborhood, as well as available through online sources that you can have shipped to your house. So it is more available than I originally thought. Now, just a regular Bunnahabhain 12-year-old, I absolutely love. Probably 2 of the most recommended whiskeys that I tend to recommend are the Ardbeg 10-year-old Islay Single Malt Scotch Whisky, 46% alcohol by volume, non-chip filtered, natural color. It's bourbon cask, heavily peated, all right? So Southern Islay, bourbon cask, heavily peated, 46%. The other bottle is the Bunnahabhain 12-year-old, which is bourbon and sherry cask, non-peated, 46.6% alcohol by volume. So they're sort of parallel whiskeys, bourbon versus sherry cask, 46 versus 46.6, and then heavily peated, non-peated, and so a really great pairing of 2 whiskeys from Islay, reflecting different styles in terms of treatment of barley and different sherry casks, and readily affordable and high quality price ratio. So as much as I love the 12-year-old from Bunnahabhain, the cask strength just takes it to a whole nother level. This is the 2021 edition. I've heard the 2022 is even better. But before I get into this, here are my notes. The Bunnahabhain 12-year-old cask strength Islay Single Malt Scotch Whisky, matured in ex-bourbon and ex-old oyster sherry cask, non-chill filtered, natural color. The 2021 edition is bottled at 55.1% alcohol by volume. The 2022 edition is bottled at 56.6% alcohol by volume. And the 2023 edition is bottled at 60.1% alcohol by volume. Prices are quite reasonable, somewhere between 80 and 100 bucks. So super deep and rich sherry notes. That's sort of that orange, tan, caramel-like color, although there's no E150 in it. Barbecue rub, brown sugar, kosher salt, maple syrup, dried black fig notes, dates, raisins, a little bit of vanilla, dried oranges, maybe a little bit of lemon. There's actually a little bit of a chocolate note there as well on the palate. It's sweet, it's savory, it's salty. It's not smoky. If it had smoke, it would be heading towards my 5S's. So I like sweet, savory, salty, smoky, and sherried. Those are my 5S's. It has all those except for smoke. If this was peated, then it would have smoke. So basically, in terms of what I really love in a whiskey, it's sitting 4 out of the 5. It's pretty intense and concentrated in flavor. It's not just more of the 12-year-old. When you proof down to 46 from cask strength, you're going to lose some other elements. So it's got more depth, it's got more richness, it's got more intense spice than the regular 12-year-old. It's got a thicker, more viscous mouthfeel, and it's got a rounder character to it. This is absolutely superb. Points wise, I'm going to go solid 95 points out of 100. This is an absolutely fantastic whiskey. Now, if you can think of a cask strength whiskey that's generally widely available, not too expensive, don't give me over 200 bucks. Try to keep I had 2 bottles here that were in the $200 range in this video. So I'm trying to keep them down. If you can think of other cask strength whiskeys that you would recommend, put it in the comment section down below. If you agree or disagree with my ordering of the whiskeys in this video, let me know down below. If there is one that you think that you would like more than the Bunnahabhain 12-year-old cask strength, let me know down below. All right, I hope you have enjoyed this video. Perhaps I've given you a little bit of a shopping list as we head into the holidays in 2024. It's about a week before Christmas. All right, if you're not already, please like and subscribe. And until next time, Slàinte. Hey, don't forget to subscribe and check out these other whiskey videos.